Hello, this is Dr. Peter Dillard. Welcome back to Black Cat Theology. Recently, someone asked me to make a short video about Wittgenstein's remarks concerning the mystical in his work Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. So today I would like to comply with that request. I want to do three things in this video. First, I want to convey the gist, what I take to be the gist of Wittgenstein's remarks in this context about the mystical. The second thing I want to do is explain what the mystical is not for Wittgenstein. And the third thing is to explain what the mystical is for Wittgenstein. So let's begin with the first task. And here I find the following passage to be a very good entering wedge into what Wittgenstein has to say, understanding what he has to say about the mystical in this book. So I'm going to read it. It's 6.43, paragraph 6.43 in the Tractatus. If good or bad willing changes the world, it can only change the limits of the world, not the facts, not the things that can be expressed in language. In brief, the world must thereby become quite another. It must, so to speak, wax or wane as a whole. The world of the happy is quite another than that of the unhappy. Now, let's remind ourselves of some basic doctrines that Wittgenstein defends in the Tractatus. One is that the world is the set of facts. That's everything that is the case. That's the set of the facts. And the facts for Wittgenstein are exhausted by the facts of everyday life, the facts of history, and the facts of natural science. Additionally, there is logic and mathematics, but neither of those bodies of information, if you will, neither logic nor the mathematics deals with facts. Logic is, and mathematics too, is sinnlos. The truth tables show that logical truths come out true no matter how the world is, and logical falsehoods come out false no matter how the world is. So they're tautologies, they're empty. They don't say anything factual. The same is true for mathematics. Wittgenstein shows that numerals can be reduced to the exponents of an operation, and these operations can be, so that when an equation can be replaced by a string of operators lined up on either side of the equal sign, and that turns out to be a tautology, as I've explained in a previous video. So mathematical truths are also sinnlos. They're not about facts. Now, notice, though, that in the passage I just read, Wittgenstein talks about a fundamental difference between the happy person and the unhappy person. And we can understand what he says here when we think about the following scenario. So the happy person is someone who overall, in his or her approach to life, is very happy, very optimistic and positive. Whereas the unhappy person is very pessimistic, melancholy, negative. Right? Now, so both of those each one of those persons has a fundamentally different orientation or attitude towards life. And yet they could equally know all the same facts or have all the same facts of everyday life, science, and also the sinnlos tautology of mathematics and logic accessible to them. They could be equally good scientists, they could be equally good logicians or mathematicians, but they have a fundamentally different attitude or outlook on life. Now, what Wittgenstein takes this to show is that this difference in attitude between them is not a difference about the facts, because they agree about what the facts are, right? So it has nothing to do with that. And the same fundamental idea can be extended to ethics and to aesthetics as well. So we can imagine one person who is very upright, honest, and honorable in his or her dealings. The other person is dishonest, is always trying to undermine other people and behave in a morally problematic way. But so those two people have a fundamentally different approach morally to life. And yet they could also both have access to the same facts. They could be equally good logicians and mathematicians and so forth. Or in the case of aesthetics, one person might see certain things as paradigmatically beautiful, and the other person might see the same things as ugly, paradigmatically ugly. They have a fundamental difference of aesthetic attitude. So what Wittgenstein takes this to show is that differences in ethical differences or aesthetic differences or differences in one's overall orientation to life, including religion, because one person might be a person of faith and the other person might not be a person of faith, those differences in fundamental attitude do not have anything to do with facts. They have rather to do with one's fundamental orientation to the facts and by extension logic and mathematics as sinnlos. This is the fundamental idea that I take Wittgenstein to be promulgating here. It's very, very important. Now, what is not mystical about that? What is one way to misunderstand what makes this attitude of Wittgenstein's mystical? Well, here's what Wittgenstein thinks the mystical is not. Sometimes, in some versions of mysticism, one tends to think that the mystical has to deal with some suprasensible realm or transcendental realm beyond the facts that cannot be put into language, but can only be sort of experienced directly through some kind of non-cognitive experience or something else like that. So that, or it might, in whatever way, it transcends the ordinary facts that I just talked about. One could also here be reminded of Kant's view of the noumenal realm beyond the phenomenal realm, where the noumenal realm contains things in themselves, including moral agents and selves and all that, the kingdom of ends. Now, Wittgenstein does not think the mystical has anything to do with that. Why would he deny this? Well, the reason is quite straightforward. Those things, even if they cannot be expressed in language, they are still facts. They're super facts, if you will. Transcendental realities, super essential or super sensitive, beyond experience facts. And Wittgenstein has just made it very clear that the mystical doesn't have anything to do with something factual. It has to do with one's attitude towards what is factual, what we already have. That's facts of everyday life, facts of natural science, and then also the non-facts, if you will, of logic and mathematics. So it doesn't have anything to do with the noumenal realm that can be shown but not said, because that would still be something factual, and Wittgenstein doesn't think that that ethics or aesthetics or religious faith has anything to do with the factual. He doesn't. The facts are exhausted about the totality of facts in the world, and those can all be put into language, as he just said in that passage, and that he says the same thing repeatedly throughout the Tractatus. So that's what the mystical is not for Wittgenstein. Well, what is the mystical, finally? How can we understand it? What makes it mystical, then? And here is where I would make the following proposal, which I think is deeply consonant with Wittgenstein's overall perspective here. Let's go back to an example where these two people have a fundamental difference of attitude towards the facts, whether it be religious or ethical or aesthetic. Let's go back to that. Now here, how are we to understand this difference of attitude? Now, one might be tempted to say, well, really, that's a psychological matter. That's a psychological matter. Basically, they have different psychology. The psychology of the one person is very positive, and of the other person very negative, or ethical or non-ethical, or aesthetic or non-aesthetic, as the case may be. So basically what we're talking about here briefly is a psychological difference. But that's ruled out by Wittgenstein, because psychology is, at least when it's done the way he thinks it should be, psychology is a natural science, or it purports to be a science, or at the very least it purports to reveal facts about people, about individuals in the world. So it would be included among all the facts that make up the world in its totality. But remember that Wittgenstein doesn't think that the mystical has anything to do with facts. It has to do with these fundamental attitudes towards facts. And furthermore, the difference between fundamental attitudes is not a factual difference. It's not something that can be explained by coming to know more about natural science or psychology or history or sociology, certainly not by coming to know more about logic or mathematics, because people who have these different attitudes could be equally adept at all those things, have the same access to all the factual material that makes up the world, and yet they have this fundamental difference. And that difference, since it cannot be explained in logical or mathematical or factual terms, is mystical. That's what I take Wittgenstein to be saying here. So that's all I wanted to discuss today. If you have questions about this or comments, please feel free to put them in the feed under this video. I'm going to post it on YouTube, and I'll also post a link to the YouTube video on Twitter, so you can raise questions or make comments in my Twitter feed or on my YouTube channel. Thank you for your attention. I hope that you found this video informative. Until next time, this is Dr. Dillard, and I hope everybody has a good day, and I look forward to seeing you again soon on Black Cat Theology. Thank you for your patience and your time.